Hey folks, on today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly, I'm flying solo one more time here in 2025, and today I've got, I guess, a bit of a rant coming in here. Today we were talking about the recent news that Firefox is going to be integrating AI into the Firefox browser over the next couple of years, and well, that makes the web browser ecosystem a difficult place now, right? There's a whole lot of reasons that I go into here, right? I have a bunch of conversation about why this is probably a bad thing for the web browser ecosystem, how it affects sysadmins, and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey folks, it's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks out there working in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I'm solo for another episode here to wrap up the calendar year 2025. And we've got a good episode for you today. We've got a fun episode. We're going to do our usual news react, nerd hour segments. I've got a comment to review from one of the YouTube versions of the show. Going to talk about that. And then we're going to dive into our main segment today, and it's basically coming from my news react item for this week's episode, and that is web browser drama, I guess I would say. This episode may come off as a little bit of a rant here because, well, short version, it doesn't feel like there are any good browsers left, and I'm going to drill into why that is, what it means for the industry, and what the heck are we as sysadmins supposed to do about that, right? But before I get to that, let's do our usual plugs for the show, right? So if you're new here, welcome. I hope you enjoy the show. If you want to find all of the links associated with the show, you can find them at www.sysadminweekly.com. We also have a newsletter that we normally, under normal circumstances, publish weekly. And we actually just got a new version of the new edition of the newsletter published just this last week. And you can find that at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And we include a lot of great links and community content. And historically, that newsletter has been very link heavy, right? But I decided to change the format of that newsletter for a couple of different reasons. The main one being, statistically, link dumping type newsletters are the most widespread type of newsletter, right? And it didn't seem worth it to me. It didn't seem worth your time as readers looking at a bunch of links that we've just dumped in a newsletter just to dump them in a newsletter, right? And so the newsletter is going to be changing format to become more commentary focused, right? It's going to be more storytelling, more point of view oriented, right? And so this last week's edition of the newsletter is the first one that follows that new format. So that said, we will continue to include, links to the latest version of the show, give you a sneak peek of what's coming up next, and all that great stuff, again, at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And again, you can find the link to that right on the website as well, too. So with that, that's kind of the plugs. I do have one other housekeeping item on my list, if I remember correctly. Yes. So I am recording this on the evening of December 19th. So this is a Friday night. You're probably listening to this. Hopefully you're listening to this on Saturday or Sunday, the 20th or 21st. And of course we have, holidays starting next week. People are going to be out next week. They're going to be out the last week of the year, right? And so SysAdmin Weekly is going to take a 2-week sabbatical, right? We're going to be off for 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of the year here, because well, everyone here at the SysAdmin Weekly office is busy, have, family stuff going on, and we'll be back the first week of January, the week of the 5th, if my memory serves me correctly. So just an FYI there. The other housekeeping thing I have for you all, and it's a bit of an exciting one. You have heard me talk about us working on some sort of method, some platform in order to allow our growing community to talk more interactively with each other, right? And, Eric and I and some of the other guys, we kicked around a bunch of different ideas. Originally, we were thinking Discord, but my problem with Discord is it's very gamer focused, right? And a lot of sysadmins I've talked to look at it as like, it's just another app I have to install, right? It's another account I have to set up and create. And so to me, the important thing was lowest barrier of entry when choosing what platform we're going to use as kind of, I guess, what I would call the community hangout, right? And so what I finally basically settled on was GitHub discussions. And my line of thinking here is like, okay, well, the vast majority of sysadmins probably have a GitHub account already, right? And the nice thing about GitHub discussions is it's all in the browser. You don't need a special app for it. Most of you will not have to create a new special account for it. And you have multiple different notification options for that discussions board, right? You can star the repository if you just want a nice quick, easy link to it. Or if you want notifications, you can watch the repository instead, right? And so you've got a lot of different options there. It's all web-based, works well on mobile, works well on the desktop, and it's not another app for you to have to manage. And so we are kind of in the final setup and testing phase of that. I'm hoping come the first week of the year, maybe before that, but come the first week of the year, we should have that up and running, and we'll be posting things like transcripts there. We'll be posting polls. We'll be posting a discussion post for each episode. You can post and share your stories. I have a whole section already created for content or topic recommendations. There we go. Topic recommendations. So if there's a topic you would really like to hear us talk about on the show, you can submit it there once I have the discussions forum. I guess it's a forum. The GitHub discussions open and ready for you to use, right? And so be on the lookout for that. And so with that, we have our two regular recurring segments that we always get to, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I have a YouTube comment from one of our episodes I want to make sure I cover. And so this particular comment was on... It was on one of our recent episodes, episode 34. And that whole episode of the podcast centered around the idea of this good enough software in the industry, right? And the fact that good enough, quote unquote, good enough software is ruining IT, and us sysadmins are paying the price, right? That's the whole crux of the episode. And there was a whole section in there where Eric and we were talking about the ways the AI has kind of helped in software development, but kind of ways we feel like AI has hurt software development and sysadmins as well, right? And so we have a user here, Unselfless, has left a comment here. I wanted to make sure that I called it out on the show here. And they go on to say, and I quote, "I hate most of what I see AI do in software development. However, it works quite well when told to create documentation based on the code you've already written. Most, not all, of the time, it's also decent at doing some basic error handling or at least giving you some ideas." And so first off, thanks for the comments. I love reading comments on the show. But in terms of this comment, I absolutely agree with it. Absolutely agree with it. Eric and I, we've actually done episodes about the importance of documentation. We have a whole episode just on documentation, how you should do it, where you should do it, that whole thing. And I'll put that in the show notes, folks, so you can take a look at that if you are interested. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I will be the first to admit, and I think this is universal amongst sysadmins, I will be the first to admit that once a project's done, the infrastructure's installed or configured or updated, or that new storage is rolled out, whatever, right? The last thing that is interesting to me to do is to go and do documentation. Nobody likes doing the paperwork after the fact, right? The fact that AI actually can do a very good job of creating documentation, at least the shell of the documentation for you based on what you've already written, I think that's a fantastic use case for AI. Absolutely fantastic use case, in my opinion. So yes, I'm absolutely glad you called that out. The other thing, basic error handling. I'm glad you brought that up too, because in that same episode, the Good Enough Software episode, Eric and I were talking about error handling. It seems like basic error handling is not as good as it used to be, right? I mean, how many times have you gotten the mysterious, an undefined error occurred, or something equally useless, right? I have one story I tell in that episode about a visual basic class I was taking in university at the time, where it was doing just some basic whole integer calculations. And, I was, really proud of my little program I had made. And, I turned it into the professor and, this form is designed to take full integers. So what does my professor do? Types in a bunch of letters. And what does the application do? It blows up into a ball of fire, right? Because I did not have, input sanitization in place, nor were we working on that at the time. And there was no basic error handling in place either, right? The program just blew up. It didn't throw an error like, oh, hey, please insert a whole integers, right? So the whole point being, right, is that basic error handling is super important, not only for the developers themselves, but for the sysadmins that have to manage and take care of that software after installation. And so, yes, I'm glad to see that AI can actually, start baking in and doing some basic error handling inside of our code as well, too. So, yes, thank you for the comments, Unselfless. Again, if you would like to be read on the show, you have a comment on an episode or a funny joke or, something you want shared on the show, you can leave comments on all of our episodes, either on YouTube or on our Spotify platform. Or if you want, you can get straight to our inboxes by sending an email to contact@sysadminweekly.com. And so, with that, let's get to the next part of our intro here, I guess, right? We've got our recurring segments. And the first one I'm going to start with is Nerd Hour, our Nerd Hour segment. And of course, the joke here is that it doesn't take a whole hour, but basically it's the segment of the show where usually my co-host and I, but it's just me today, we talk about all the geeky, nerdy things that we've been working on, either in our professional life or, in our personal life, right? And so I have been working on some stuff in my home lab quite a bit lately, actually. I have recently migrated a lot of the, I guess, I don't want to strangely say critical to the house, critical to the family workloads here in the home lab. I have migrated them from Hyper-V to basically a K3S, a lightweight Kubernetes cluster now. And the one workload I've been working and tinkering with quite a lot is internal DNS resolution with some DNS filtering baked in. And historically, I've always used Pi-hole for that. Pi-hole is fantastic, a fantastic utility. If you've never used it, I highly recommend you check it out. It's open source. It can run on top of a Raspberry Pi if you want. And it does a fantastic job of filtering out ads and all kinds of garbage via DNS, and it can also act as a DNS resolver for your local network. Now, there's a problem with running it on Kubernetes. It does run on Kubernetes, but not as well as you would like it. So If you're not familiar with the Kubernetes world, Kubernetes is designed to run containers, right? Kind of, if you don't know what containers are, they're kind of like lightweight virtual machines, whereas a virtual machine virtualizes the entire operating system. A container kind of shares some runtime stuff with the host system, but it kind of containerizes the application layer. So you could kind of sort of say it's application virtualization. Anyway, um, the way that Pi-hole runs is it wants to have stateful storage. It wants to have storage that is there at all times and that it can write to, and it has an identity, right? And so in the Kubernetes world, when you deploy a workload, you tell Kubernetes how many replicas do you want, right? And what's nice is if you have 4 nodes in your Kubernetes cluster or 6 or whatever, I have 4 in mine, I could say, give me 4 replicas. That way, if any of the 4 machines go down, there's still, DNS resolution available on 4 nodes. Well, the problem with Pi-hole is that, I could spin up multiple replicas, but they are each their own stateful image. Pi-hole is not really designed to run in a load balancer type situation, which Kubernetes has a load balancer baked in. And so Pi-hole is not really cluster aware. And so when you go out and try to add local DNS entries into your Pi-hole instance, maybe you end up on this replica in the cluster this time, but then the next time you log in to make changes, you end up on that replica, and you end up in this weird situation where you kind of have split brain DNS, right? And so, with that in mind, what I've been working on is I have been tinkering with the blocky DNS resolver instead. And so, again, I've been trying to use all of the capabilities in our recording platform as much as I can. So I'm going to actually put this on the screen here. So yes, blocky is a DNS resolver and ad blocker, just like Pi-hole, very much the same thing, but it is designed to run in a stateless fashion. And so, going through the list here has a lot of the same features as Pi-hole. If you've used Pi-hole, you're probably looking at this and like, yeah, a lot of these same features, right? So, has allowed deny lists based on client groups. So you could define, a group for your kids, a group for smart home devices, et cetera, et cetera. Has regex support, blocking of request domains, CNAME, right? All the DNS things, right? And what's so nice about blocky in this Kubernetes situation is I can do all the configuration of blocky just via a YAML file. So with Kubernetes, right, you're configuring a lot of your stuff using YAML, and I can just embed my DNS and filtration settings right inside of a YAML file so that DNS, as it should be, becomes a stateless workload. And I can have multiple replicas, and I don't have this weird multi-configuration mess that I have right now with Pi-hole. I worked around it with Pi-hole. I set up what's called a stateful set. Basically, it's kind of a special container that is stateful, and it's all self-contained, and it has persistent data, which is not really the design philosophy behind containers and Kubernetes, right? Containers are supposed to be like cattle. But anyway, I'm rambling. I could do a whole episode just on the Kubernetes stuff I've been working on. So like I said, I've been rambling, but that's the type of stuff that I have been working on for my nerd hour stuff over the last week or two. So I'll have to report back on how the stuff with blocky goes, but I think it's going to work out nicely. So with that, time to get to our news react segment, and today's news react item is what ultimately morphs into our main topic today. And I'm going to go browse to that right now, and I will read the headline for those folks that are listening. And To say I felt like ranting when I read this news would be an understatement. And so this is my news react item for the week. And again, it turns into our main topic today. And the headline reads as, and I quote, Mozilla says Firefox will evolve into an AI browser, and nobody is happy about it. With, and this is funny here, what looks like an M dash in the title. And then it says, I've never seen a company so astoundingly out of touch. And so basically what it comes down to is Mozilla has a new CEO. They've confirmed that Firefox will evolve into an AI browser over the next 3 years. And the article goes on to say in the subheading here that the internet is not happy about it, nor should they be. So, I have a lot of issues with this. I have a lot of issues with this decision. I have had kind of this simmering angst with the web browser ecosystem for a couple of years now. And I'm going to get into that more here, but I want to finish going through this article really quick. And so this quote is what really stood out to me in this article. So I scrolled down the article a little bit, and there's a quote, right from the new CEO. And I quote, every product we build must give people agency in how it works. Privacy, data use, and AI must be clear and understandable. Controls must be simple. AI should always be a choice. I'm going to come back to that later. They continue, something people can easily turn off. A Firefox will grow from a browser into a broader ecosystem of trusted software. Firefox will remain our anchor. It will evolve into a modern AI browser and support a portfolio of new and trusted software additions. Unquote. And so this was reported by the awesome folks over at windowscentral.com. This article is by Zach Bowden. If you've not looked at Windows Central before, fantastic tech site for typically very Microsoft-centric news, right? But yeah, so this is a very interesting, development because kind of launching into our main topic area of the show now, right? I'm beyond my news react. Obviously, you can tell I'm not happy about this news. But looking at the wider web browser ecosystem, what it comes down to, at least from my perspective, is that Firefox was really the last reasonable middle ground in terms of web browsers. And the industry, the market, consumers, everybody defaults to Chrome these days. And with good reason. I mean, I have a different page here pulled up that talks about market share. So this is tech2geek.net. This is a report from July 2025, and basically they used a stat counter, or maybe the software is called stat counter, I'm not sure. And basically utilizing data from billions of page views, they were able to piece together what market share in the browser market looks like. And so we can see here market share in July of 2025, surprise, Chrome is at the top of the list with like 70% market share, followed by Edge at roughly 12%, Safari at 6.5%, Firefox at 5.3%, Opera at 2.19%, and Brave at 1.5%. And so, I mean, you look at this list, and I mean, the web is Chrome and Google, right? And so when I look at this through the lens of this news from Firefox, is Firefox still felt like it was a web browser that was trying to be a web browser and not live inside of the Chrome monoculture. And I'm going to come back to that monoculture idea here in a second, right? But really, it acted as something, in my opinion, as a counterweight over Google's influence on the web. Because, yeah, Microsoft used to have their own rendering engine for Edge back when Edge first came out a long, long time ago. But then they switched to Chrome under the hood. So Edge is just Chromium under the hood. Same thing for Opera. Same thing for Brave, right? That's an issue. And I'm going to talk more about that. But really, Firefox has their own rendering engine, right? They acted as a counterweight against Google's influence. And this AI integration, and I'm not vilifying AI. I'm going to come back to that too. But this move towards deeper AI integration and this ecosystem of software solutions is starting to make Firefox feel like not just a web browser anymore. Not just a web browser, right? And yes, they have all these nice, let me go back to the news article, but they have all this nice verbiage, right, about how AI should always be a choice. Opt-out does sound safe on paper, right? But history shows us in the market that opt-out doesn't always stay opt-out. And so I have concerns around Firefox moving that direction as well, too. And really what it comes down to is that market pressure, right? So let's say Firefox does go and integrate AI like they say they're going to over the next 3 years. Eventually, market pressures will do what market pressures do, in that it will dictate a certain behavior from Mozilla in regards to AI choices and AI integration to operate a certain way. And maybe it doesn't become opt-out anymore, right? And so that kind of gives you the baseline of where my brain's at with this whole debacle, right? The fact of the matter is that, and I said at the beginning of this whole rant, right? The browser market is already it already was in a bad place. So I've talked about the monoculture that is Chrome, right? Chromium dominates the market. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what we have now, with the exception of Firefox and Safari, and I'm going to come back to that, it's a monoculture. Every major browser basically runs Chromium under the hood. And so we have this browser monoculture. And Google effectively, because of that, they control the modern web, how it behaves, how it evolves. That is a massive source of power in Google's hands, because they can basically control how the web evolves. Edge used to be my daily driver browser, and a lot of people are probably screaming at their their radio in the car right now, or screaming at their computer like, "Really, Edge, Andy? You used Edge?" I've had coworkers see Edge open on my my laptop before, and they're like, "Really, Edge?" Yes, Edge. I really liked Edge when it first came out. Especially when it came out with the Chromium engine under the hood, because it was basically de-Googled Chromium, and it was very lightweight, it was super fast, and it was just a web browser. And then over the next couple of years, Microsoft added a lot of bloat to it. A lot of bloat to it over the preceding years. We even ended up with like some temporarily, I don't think it's there anymore, it's been pulled into Copilot, but there were some shopping things natively inside the browser, some coupon stuff. I mean, junk that, in my opinion, does not belong in the browser unless I, as the user, choose to pull it in via an extension or something like that. And so I've stopped not liking Edge because of that, and Edge also has an insane amount of telemetry happening these days as well, too. They always have collected telemetry, but I feel like they collect more today than they used to. I don't have any data off the top of my head to back that, but it's just kind of vibes, I guess, right? And that brings me back to Chromium. I get that. The next question I get asked is like, okay, well, why did you use Edge? What do you have against Chrome? My issue with Chrome is the privacy aspect. I've never been. Google's fine, but I have never liked Google's spyware type behavior, right? The privacy concerns that center around the Google ecosystem. It's always been a kind of a sore spot with me. If you're running Chrome on your machine, just out of curiosity, go and run a netstat and look at how many open connections there are at any given time because of Chrome, right? There's always open hooks back to Google services. And I understand that, yes, there's going to be some of that for updates and things like that. But to me, it feels like there's probably more than there should be. Now, that brings us to the other browsers, right? I've kind of explained why I don't like Chromium. I've kind of explained why I don't like Edge anymore. Well, I guess I didn't finish with Edge. I talked about all the bloatware they started adding to it, right? Let's talk about Copilot. We have Copilot in Edge. And so now we have AI inside the browser, which is fine when it's made. I'm okay with AI in the browser when it lives kind of off to the side in its own context. What I have an issue with is when we start getting agentic AI running inside of the browser, and it creates a security issue. All of us in the security industry have been waving the red flag that, hey, we don't understand the threat profile well enough yet to start using agentic AI browsers in the mainstream. We don't understand all of the different attack types that are out there, all the different threat avenues, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. And so that's kind of why Edge has kind of fallen off the list for me, is because I feel like it's gotten bloated. We're being force-fed Copilots in Edge and everywhere else, which brings me to the other browsers. Safari. Let me talk about Safari for a second. As a Mac user, I really, 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 really want to like Safari. I really do. It's a beautiful browser. It's responsive. I like how it works. I like its integrations with the Mac OS. The problem I have with it is at least half of the SaaS applications that I use are not supported in Safari. There's a supportability issue in the ecosystem with Safari. And that right there is probably a deal breaker for most sysadmins. Your average consumer user, probably fine, right? But for most of us sysadmins, we run too many different SaaS-based applications that Safari is probably an issue because of that. So that kind of marks Safari out. Opera. I used Opera for a long time back in the early 2000s. It's a Chromium derivative now. It's just Chromium under the hood, right? So we've got that monoculture issue again. Anything that Google does with Chromium ends up everywhere else in every browser that uses Chromium under the hood. And yes, Microsoft, Opera, they can, Chromium's open source. They can change what they want, but it's still Chromium under the hood. And so to me, that's, the list, right? We've talked about Chromium, Edge, Safari, Opera, and Firefox to start with this whole rant of mine today, right? And Firefox was the one holdout, the one browser that I felt like was still just a browser. They were not force-feeding us AI. They were very privacy-centric, and they used their own rendering engine under the hood. There's no Chromium Monoculture as part of that. And so now we find out that AI is going to be baked into Firefox. We're going to have this agentic type stuff inside of Firefox, conceivably in the future. And that creates a whole security concern for me now, right? And the larger security community. And I want to be clear here, AI is not the problem. AI is not the problem. People who listen to the show know that I love working with AI for certain things. It's an amazing tool in the right context. I'm not sure it belongs in the browser yet, nor do I think I want it in the browser. And AI is not the problem. It's the threat model, the missing threat model. That's the problem. We don't understand the threat model for AI yet. And the other fact of the matter is historically AI tools have been off on their own, right? They've been in their own security context. Bringing them into the browser is a problem because browsers are probably one of, if not the most trusted piece of software that has deep access to our activity as end users, right? You think about all the stuff that we do with browsers, social media, banking, productivity, proprietary information for professional work. Think of everything that flows through our browser. Now we're going to bake in an AI that has agentic capabilities that can go out and do things as the user. Now, I'm sure that's not where Firefox will start, but that's where the market's moving. And I talked about market forces. Market forces are going to most likely force Mozilla to go that way if that's not the direction they're already thinking. And yes, they say opt out. Everything will be opt out and by choice until it isn't. Now, yes, maybe I'm being a doomer here, doom and gloom, but I've been in the industry long enough to know that when market forces push organizations in a certain direction to maintain market share and or relevance, they typically will make the wrong choice. Boy, I sound like a negative Nancy today, don't I? That's not intended, but man, I was really bummed out about this news about Firefox, right? And so coming back to the whole agentic AI piece of this conversation, right? We have security concerns that we don't fully understand yet, right? We've got new risks being introduced, right? Content influencing actions, prompt injection concerns, right? That prompt injection is a big exploit vector that, we know it's there. We haven't been able to draw a nice, clean box around that particular threat avenue yet because there's so many different ways it can be done. And the other thing here is the blurred trust boundaries. In order for AI agents to do work for us, we're going to have to give them access to our email, our productivity software, browser tabs, right? We're blurring the security boundaries that we have depended on for so long. And so we don't yet fully understand the long-term security implications of AI in the browser. And so with that in mind, let me go over to this Hacker News article that I pulled up as part of my preparation for today's episode. And you might have seen this back in October, but Perplexity has their Comet browser out there. There was this this attack that came up in the security space called comet jacking. And basically what happened was this is a one-click attack that turned the Perplexity browser, an AI browser, into a data thief. And I'll put the link to this in the show notes so you can read the whole thing, but I wanted to come down here to this particular bit here. And I'm quoting the article here. The attack, so comet jacking, the attack in a nutshell hijacks the AI assistant embedded in the browser to steal data, all while bypassing Perplexity's data protections using, this was the kicker for me, trivial base 64 encoding tricks. Now, if you've lived in the security space for any length of time, you know that base 64 encoding this is like threat actor 101, right? Threat actors love to use base 64 encoding to hide things like scripts and hide data for transport. They use base 64 a lot. So the fact that Perplexity data protections didn't take into account base 64 encoding, that's a red flag for me, right? I mean, that's, like I said, that's threat actor 101. And yes, building a web browser is a very complicated thing, right? But you've heard me say this on the show before, and some of my guests on the show say this before. We We are forging ahead with the whole AI thing more with a focus on innovation than we do with a focus on security. It's that age-old thing in tech where we do the innovation first and then we'll worry about securing it later, right? And I have to, once again, quote the immortal Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park here, right? We were so preoccupied with whether we could, didn't stop to think if you should, right? And that applies here. This is just one attack, right? And so in this case, the attack. Let me just continue reading from the article right here. Right. So the attack, it takes place over 5 steps, activating when a victim clicks on a specially crafted URL, either sent in a phishing email or present on a web page. Instead of taking the user to the intended destination, the URL instructs the Comet browser's AI to execute a hidden prompt. So prompt injection, right? That prompt captures the user's data from, say, Gmail, obfuscates it using base64 encoding, and then transmits that information to an endpoint under the attacker's control. So we have a case here where prompt injection using in-browser AI can be used to exfiltrate data from a mailbox. Now, that's just one example, right? I mean, think of all the different things that you could do that with, depending on what the AI in the browser has been provided access to. So again, to me, this screams we don't understand the threat avenues well enough yet, right? But we're going to forge ahead with AI in the browser anyway, right? And I don't have a problem with there being AI browsers. What I have a problem with is with every mainline browser available having AI baked into it. That's what my problem here is. Yeah. Anyway, so the next question that's probably on everyone's mind is like, well, Andy, why don't you just use a fork of Firefox then? If you don't like the direction Firefox is going in, why don't you use a fork of Firefox? I'm glad you asked that, because this is the avenue I went down as well too when I saw this news, because already the writing was on the wall for me. Like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to be using Firefox long term. What am I going to go use next? What is left? Well, there are some nice, some nice forks of Firefox. You've got LibreWolf, which I've just pulled up on here on the screen. LibreWolf is, a nice custom version of Firefox that has a specific focus on privacy, security, and freedom per their webpage, right? And they have some really nice features. A focus on no telemetry, private search, uBlock origin is baked in automatically, fast updates, it's open source, right? This looks great, right? This looks great on paper. Oh, there's another one out here. There's WaterFox. WaterFox really caught my eye when I was looking at these, right? And so, where was it here? Yes. So, what ships with WaterFox? So again, this is a fork of Firefox as well too. And I believe both of these, both LibreWolf and WaterFox, are based on the extended support release version of Firefox. And so here, what shipped with WaterFox, the one that really caught my eye here was the free oblivious DNS. And so basically this is I'll just read it here again for the folks that are can't see the screen. So on their website, it says, encrypted for privacy, oblivious for anonymity. So traditional encrypted DNS hides what you're asking from intermediaries on the network, while oblivious DNS hides who is asking from the resolver. WaterFox ships that combination by default for free. So DNS over HTTPS basically is how I read this. And the one thing I have to dig into a little bit more here is find out if WaterFox automatically takes care of the encrypted client hello, the ECH. DNS over HTTPS, of course, encrypts and obfuscates the DNS lookup itself, but it can't obfuscate that initial hello between my web browser and the web server. That's what encrypted client hello does, and that's a different thing that has to be configured. I'll put some links in the show notes if you're interested in that. It's going down the DNS over HTTPS rabbit hole and the encrypted client hello, rabbit hole is some interesting reading. I'll put that in the show notes so you folks can take a look at that. And so a couple other features here that Firefox offers, right? Zero telemetry, same thing here. Private tabs, quality of life power tools. I'm not exactly sure what that meant. So Firefox brings tab management, status bars, layout controls, and more straight into settings. Layout controls could be interesting. So I'm kind of picturing the ability to modify the UI. So anyway, that's all to say that I'm going to have to check these out, right? And so the fork discussion it's a meaningful discussion. But there's always a but with me in this particular rant and episode, right? Forks are not a long-term escape hatch because forks depend entirely on the upstream project. In this case, Firefox Extended Support Release, right? ESR. Yeah, forks can disable features. So let's say the upstream project, Firefox in this case, integrates something that Waterfox or LibreWolf doesn't like. Yeah, they can disable features. They can't change upstream architectural direction, though. And maybe it won't happen right away when the AI when AI gets integrated into Firefox. Maybe it doesn't happen right away, but as it becomes more deeply integrated, it's going to be more difficult for these Firefox forks to strip that out. And at what point does it become almost impossible for those forks to strip it out? Yes, Firefox, maybe they say they'll always provide a means in order to disable features. But again, I have real concerns about market forces forcing a certain decision one way or the other there, right? Well, one way or the other. The bad way, right? Forcing AI, not giving users a choice. The other thing with forks, right? And, having larger upstream architectural changes, you have things like larger patch deltas, right? Slower security updates. If there's a lot of architectural difference between the source project and my forked project, it's going to take me more time as a developer for that forked project to develop security updates, right? In certain situations. Higher maintainer burden, right? I'm just going through my list here, right? Greater risk of missing upstream fixes. Forks are in my opinion, to this whole issue I'm talking about today, forks are a defensive posture, not necessarily a solution. They're a temporary fix. And that all brings me to my last major point of this episode. And you're probably like, oh, thank God, Andy's almost done ranting, right? You know me. I always like to end with a what now, right? What do we do now? Where do we go from here? If you're like me and you don't like the Chromium Monoculture because of the Google issues, right? The privacy issues. And you don't like Edge because of the bloatware and the forced co-piloting. And you can't use Safari because of supportability concerns. You can't use Brave or Opera or any of the other Chromium derivatives because Chromium, right? That monoculture issue again. And now Firefox is integrating something that the Firefox community doesn't seem to want. I just want my browser to be a browser, right? I don't want my browser to be all the things. Because, really, when it comes down to it, our browsers it's basically an operating system on top of an operating system, right? That's really what a browser is. Heck, Chromebooks exist. It's a browser as an operating system. And so I guess, and this is my old graybeard sysadmin side sticking through here, right, is that I miss the days when a browser was just a browser. And when we have tools, the browser used to just be a browser. It was a tool, right? It had a specific need. And now it seems like in modern IT, everything has to be a platform. Everything has to be a platform, right? And it makes sense for some things, others not. For a browser, I don't think it makes sense for a browser to be a whole ecosystem and a whole platform. A browser should just be a browser. Again, that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what your guys' opinion on that is. Again, you can leave comments on the YouTube video, on the Spotify episodes. Again, you just drop right into my my inbox, contact@sysadminweekly.com. And again, like I said, I'm going to have those GitHub discussions up soon too. So we can talk about this, right? I would love to get your take on this particular issue as well too. And so coming back to what do we do now, right? And so there's no clean browser choice left. In my view, there's baggage with every single choice of browser out there, right? The next place that people go is, well, what about building a new browser? I would love to believe that somebody will step into this massive hole that is now existing in the browser market and create an entirely new browser, but that's probably not going to happen, because creating a new browser from scratch, a new rendering engine under the hood, new UI, new browser, everything, that is a Herculean task. You think about how long it's taken for our modern browsers to get where they are, right? Especially if you have to create that rendering engine from scratch, the Chromium piece, right? It's a Herculean task, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight or happen quickly. And in my eye, like I said, the market here is wide open for, I guess, what I would call a truly boring security first browser, right? And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get that as an industry until something major happens, some major security incident at the browser level that forces change. I hope I'm wrong about that. I do. I hope I'm wrong about that. But again, been in the industry 20, 25 years now, and typically it takes pain in order to affect change, unfortunately. And so I'd love to see some company step into this space, some independent, unique, security, boring browser, right? I think there's a market for it. And I'll be watching for it. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get it anytime soon. So I'd love to see what your guys' thoughts are on this particular issue. I'd love to see what your plans are if the AI thing inside of Firefox is a deal breaker. I guess I'm still in kind of the wait and see mode. I'm probably going to take refuge in one of these forks sometime in the near future. But I'd love to get your take on that. Again, leave a comment on the episode either on YouTube or Spotify. Contact@sysadminweekly.com. We'll also get you the inbox. Again, would love to hear your thoughts on this. And so with that, that's rant over. That's rant done with. Hopefully you've found this discussion engaging. I know it's not necessarily hard-hitting sysadmin trenches type discussion, but relevant to the role, because all of us use a web browser day in and day out every single day. And we as sysadmins, we use web browsers in ways that your standard user doesn't, right? So we're kind of the power users of the bunch, right? So anyway, hopefully you found value in this episode, and thank you for spending some time with us. And with that, I will let you get back to your day. Reminder, again, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, but reminder, we are taking the last 2 weeks of 2025 off, and we will be back with a fresh episode and a whole new lineup of topics for 2026. We'll be back that week of January 5th. So until then, you all stay safe out there. Have happy holidays wherever you're at. Enjoy the holidays and the new year. And we will see you again for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.